It is 3 a.m. You are not asleep because your brain has decided without your permission that right now is the time to conduct a full audit of your life. Your thumb moves across the screen. You did not exactly choose to open the app. It just happened, the way breathing happens, the way blinking happens. And now, you are inside it. Someone you went to school with just closed a funding round. The caption is humble, grateful and humbled. But the number is right there in the post, and it lands in your chest like a stone dropping into still water. You feel the ripple go all the way down. You keep scrolling. A person you follow, someone you have never met, someone who exists to you only as a grid of photographs, is standing on a balcony somewhere in Lisbon or Bali or Tokyo, holding a coffee cup, looking out over a city that is not yours. The light on their face is perfect. The caption is 3 words. You have been to interesting places too. You have had mornings like that. But somehow, right now, yours don't count. You keep scrolling. An influencer is demonstrating their morning routine. It is filmed in 4K. It involves a cold plunge, a specific kind of journal, 18 supplements arranged on a marble countertop, and the kind of natural light that costs $5,000 a month in rent to access. The caption says, "This took me years to build." The comment section says, "So inspiring." Your morning involved hitting snooze twice and making coffee while standing over the sink in yesterday's shirt. You know that their authentic morning routine took a full production crew and 3 hours to stage. You know this, and it still works. The inadequacy installs itself anyway, clean and automatic, like malware that bypasses every rational defense you have. You close the app. You open it again. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. This is architecture. The platform was not designed to make you feel good. It was designed to make you stay. And the single most reliable mechanism for making a human being stay is the precise surgical delivery of social comparison, not to someone impossibly out of reach, but to someone just slightly ahead of you, close enough to sting, close enough to feel like it should have been you. Your dopamine system, which evolved to motivate behavior by signaling reward and scarcity, cannot distinguish between a predator approaching your campfire 40,000 years ago and a stranger's LinkedIn announcement at 3 a.m. The neurological response is nearly identical. Threat detected, attention locked, sleep overridden. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for perspective, for long-view thinking, but the capacity to say this does not actually matter, is dimmed by exhaustion and no match for the subcortical alarm your amygdala is ringing at full volume. So you lie there, calculating. How did they get there? What did I miss? What is wrong with me? What do I need to do differently? The questions loop. They do not produce answers. They produce more questions. The arithmetic of comparison never balances because the benchmark is not fixed. The moment you approach it, the algorithm finds you a new one, slightly higher, slightly more unattainable, perfectly calibrated to the specific shape of your insecurity. You have accomplished things. Real things. Things that cost you something. Time, sacrifice, genuine effort. You know this. You can list them if you try. But at 3 a.m., against the curated highlight reel of 1,000 other lives running simultaneously on a device in your hand, those real things feel small. They feel like they don't count. And the worst part, the part that makes this particular pain so exhausting, is that it doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It doesn't arrive with the drama of a breakdown. It is quiet. It runs in the background of every 2,400 years ago. A man named Zhuangzi was living through a version of your 3 a.m., not the phone screen. Not the algorithm, but the mechanism was identical because the mechanism is human. He lived in the Warring States period, a China convulsed by military violence and philosophical competition in equal measure. Every school of thought was fighting for dominance. The Confucianists said the good life required moral self-cultivation, ritual discipline, and climbing the correct hierarchies. The legalists said it required strategic usefulness to the state. The Mohist said it required measurable social contribution. Every serious intellectual in Zhuangzi's world was arguing a version of the same question: how do I become more virtuous, more useful, more strategically valuable, more recognized? The entire culture was a performance review. The entire culture was a metrics dashboard. The entire culture was the comment section. Zhuangzi looked at all of it and said, "The problem is not how you optimize the race. The problem is that you are running it." He articulated this through a story about a tree. A master carpenter named Shi is traveling with his apprentice when they pass an enormous ancient tree, gnarled, twisted, its trunk so irregular it could never be cut into a single useful plank. The apprentice marvels at its size. Shi waves it off. "Useless wood," he says. "Look how it twists. Look how it sprawls. You couldn't make a boat from it, a beam from it, a door from it. It is good for nothing. Walk on." They walk on. That night, the tree appears to the carpenter in a dream. "What exactly are you comparing me to?" The tree asks. "Those straight, useful trees. Where are they now?" They were felled precisely because they were useful. Their usefulness was the mechanism of their destruction. I have been useless for hundreds of years. My uselessness is why I am still here. The carpenter wakes up. He tells his apprentice. The apprentice doesn't quite get it. Most people don't. Here is what Zhuangzi is doing with this parable, and it is more precise than it first appears. He is not simply saying, slow down, or enjoy life more. He is attacking the epistemological framework that makes comparison feel rational in the first place. He is saying that when you look at another person's life and calculate your deficit, when you see the funding round, the balcony in Lisbon, the marble-countertop morning routine, and feel yourself come up short, you are doing exactly what the carpenter did. You are applying a single, narrow standard of usefulness to an infinitely complex terrain. You are mistaking one kind of value for all kinds of value. The Chinese term at the center of this idea is Wu Yong Ji Yong, the usefulness of the useless. It is not a paradox constructed for cleverness. It is a perceptual claim that an entire category of genuine value is structurally invisible to a mind that has been trained to measure, rank, and compare. The gnarled tree does not fail to register as valuable because it lacks value. It fails to register because the carpenter is using the wrong instrument. You are using the wrong instrument. The social comparison loop that runs at 3 a.m., the one that processes a stranger's LinkedIn post as evidence of your inadequacy, that loop is not running on reality. It is running on one metric applied universally at the exclusion of everything else. It is the carpenter's logic scaled to an entire life. And here is where Zhuangzi becomes genuinely dangerous to comfortable thinking. He does not suggest you need a better metric. He suggests the relentless pursuit of any single metric, productivity, status, achievement, even virtue, is the trap, not the specific benchmark you're failing to hit, the benchmarking itself. In Zhuangzi's time, the trees that were useful got cut down. In yours, the people who perform usefulness most effectively get the most engagement, the most visibility, the most social signal, and you watch them at 3 a.m. and feel their usefulness as an indictment of your own. The algorithm is not new. The algorithm is ancient. It is the Warring States period running on your phone. What Zhuangzi offers is not a productivity hack. It is not a reframe that helps you optimize better. It is something more radical and, for exactly that reason, more difficult. It is permission to stop treating your life as a problem to be solved through superior performance. The gnarled tree did not flourish by becoming more useful. It flourished by becoming so deeply, completely itself that usefulness stopped being the relevant question. Think about the last time you felt genuinely proud of something you did, and then watch that feeling evaporate the moment you saw what someone else had done. Not because your work got worse, because the comparison loaded. That is not a motivational failure. That is not a discipline problem. That is a structural flaw in the instrument you are using to measure your life. And until you see it as an instrument problem, not a you problem, you will keep recalibrating toward a standard that was never designed to include you in the first place. Here is what the algorithm actually does at the neurological level. Every time you open a feed and encounter someone else's metric, their funding round, their book deal, their morning run at 5 a.m., your brain's social comparison circuitry fires. Researchers at the California Institute of Technology have identified neurons in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex that track social rank almost continuously, updating your position in an invisible hierarchy in real time. This is not metaphor. This is hardware. Your brain is running a background process, constantly calculating, where do I stand? And the social media environment, by design, floods the process with data points curated to make one answer feel inevitable. Behind, the result is what psychologists call reference point contamination. Your internal benchmark for enough gets overwritten by external signals repeatedly until you cannot access your own original sense of sufficiency. You stop knowing what you actually want because the wanting has been colonized by what is visible, measurable, and being rewarded with engagement. This is the carpenter's logic, fully industrialized. Zhuangzi's carpenter Shi could only see the gnarled tree as a failure because he was carrying one measuring stick, structural utility for human construction. He had no instrument for sustaining an entire ecosystem for 4 centuries. He had no instrument for sheltering hundreds of travelers. He had no instrument for surviving every war, every drought, every axe, because nothing about you was worth taking. His framework was not wrong exactly. It was just catastrophically incomplete. And its incompleteness was invisible to him, because inside any single framework, everything looks like it's being accurately assessed. Your framework has the same problem. The parts of your life that don't produce output. The long walk without a destination, the hour you spent genuinely laughing, the afternoon you read something with no professional application, the friendship that has never helped your career. Your current instrument registers these as waste, old, as cost, as the price you pay for the productive hours. But Zhuangzi is asking you to consider a different possibility, that these are not the margins of your life, that these are the conditions under which your actual life becomes possible at all. Neuroscience, interestingly, agrees with a 2,000-year-old Chinese philosopher on this point. The default mode network, the brain system that activates during rest, during undirected thought, during what looks from the outside like doing nothing, is now understood to be central to memory consolidation, creative insight, and the formation of a coherent sense of self. When you eliminate unstructured time in pursuit of productivity, you are not optimizing. You are degrading the cognitive infrastructure that makes meaningful work possible. The useless hours are load-bearing. You just cannot see the load from inside the carpenter's framework. So, here is the practical inversion Zhuangzi is offering. And it is not comfortable. Stop asking whether something is useful. Start asking whether it is yours. Not useful to your metrics, not useful to your audience, not useful to the version of yourself you are performing for people who are mostly watching their own feeds anyway. The gnarled tree did not survive by becoming better at being lumber. It survived by becoming so completely, irreducibly itself that the woodcutter's logic stopped applying. The straight trees were efficient. They were optimized. They are stumps. The gnarled tree is still here. There is a second story in Zhuangzi, and most people skip past it because it doesn't look like a lesson. It looks like a catalog of broken things. A mountain tree, too twisted to be lumber, alive. A sacrificial ox, too flawed for ritual, alive. A man named Wang Tai, who lost a foot to punishment and somehow attracts more followers than Confucius. Zhuangzi lines these up deliberately. Damaged or disqualified, surviving, and then he asks, almost casually, do you see the pattern? Here is the pattern. Everything that was selected for, everything that fit the criteria, that performed well against the standard, that made itself useful, legible, extractable, got consumed. The beautiful timber trees were taken first. The healthy ox was slaughtered for ceremony. The accomplished, optimized, high-performing individuals were placed at the center of every demand, every expectation, every system that needed something from them. Their usefulness was not a reward, it was a target. And here is where this stops being ancient philosophy and starts being your Tuesday afternoon. Think about the last time you got genuinely good at something visible. Maybe you delivered a project ahead of schedule. Maybe your content started gaining traction. Maybe you became the person in the room who could solve the hard problem. What happened next? More requests, tighter deadlines. The bar moved. The expectations recalibrated upward before you could catch your breath. You became, in the vocabulary of every system around you, a resource. And resources, by definition, exist to be used. This is not cynicism. This is the mechanical logic of optimization culture, stated plainly. The moment you signal competence through your output, your metrics, your visible hustle, you activate a kind of extraction pull. Colleagues route their hardest problems to you. Algorithms detect your engagement and increase the frequency of stimulation. Your own psychology, trained on external validation, starts demanding ever higher proof of worth. The treadmill does not accelerate because you failed. It accelerates because you succeeded. That is the trap. That is exactly what Zhuangzi is pointing at. Researchers studying occupational burnout at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden found that high performers, specifically individuals who ranked highest on measures of conscientiousness and output, were significantly more likely to report chronic exhaustion within 18 months of a major professional achievement. Not failure, achievement. The success itself generated the conditions for collapse, because success in an extraction-based system doesn't earn you rest. It earns you more surface area to be extracted from. Your exhaustion is not a character flaw. It is the predictable output of a predictable equation. The more consumable you made yourself, the more you got consumed. So what is the alternative? Zhuangzi is not telling you to become incompetent. He's not romanticizing failure. Wang Tai, the man who lost his foot, is not celebrated because he is broken. He is celebrated because he stopped organizing his entire existence around being useful to systems that were never designed to give anything back. He developed what Zhuangzi calls inner completeness, a core that does not depend on external validation for its stability. And paradoxically, that intactness drew people to him, not despite his disqualification from conventional success, but because of it. He had something that the optimized, high-performing, fully extracted people around him had already spent. Himself. The microscopic start here is almost insultingly small, and that is intentional. Today, identify one thing you are doing purely because it makes you more legible to an external system, a metric you are chasing, a skill you are performing, a version of yourself you are maintaining for an audience, and do not do it. Just today, not forever. Notice what the discomfort feels like. That discomfort is not emptiness. That is the treadmill slowing down, and your nervous system not yet knowing what to do with stillness. The straight trees were optimized. They are gone. Comment below, what is one version of yourself you are performing right now for an audience, a metric or a standard that you are not sure you actually believe in anymore? Here is the lie that comparison culture has been running on you since approximately the age of 13. There is one scale, it is the correct scale, and you already know where you rank on it. You do not question the scale, you just try to climb it. Zhuangzi tells another story. A carpenter named Shi is walking through a village when he passes an enormous, ancient oak tree, gnarled beyond use, branches too crooked for lumber, wood too dense to carve. Hundreds of people have gathered to admire it. The carpenter walks past without a second glance. His apprentice is baffled. "You stop to examine every other tree," he says. "Why not this one?" She doesn't even slow down. "That tree is completely useless," he says. "It would make terrible lumber. That's why it's still alive." That night, the tree appears to Shi in a dream, and it says something that should stop you in your tracks. It says, "You're comparing me to useful trees, but I'm not trying to be a useful tree. The moment I became useful to you, I'd be dead. Now bring that into your actual life." Think about the last time you felt genuinely inadequate, not in a vague, ambient way, but that specific, stomach-dropping moment when you looked at someone else's metrics, their salary, their follower count, their title, their apartment, their apparent effortlessness, and felt yourself shrink. What you were experiencing in that moment was not an accurate self-assessment. It was the result of accepting someone else's measuring instrument and then being surprised that you don't score well on a test you never agreed to take. This is the mechanism that psychologists at the University of Michigan studying social comparison theory have documented with uncomfortable precision. When individuals are exposed to upward social comparison, seeing others who appear more successful on a visible metric, their self-reported competence drops, their anxiety spikes, and crucially, their motivation does not improve. They do not work smarter. They work more frantically, chasing a standard that was designed by someone else's context, someone else's starting conditions, someone else's definition of what the tree is supposed to be for. The algorithm is a carpenter. It is walking through the forest with specific lumber requirements. It stops at the trees that fit its criteria and marks them. It walks past everything else. The question is not how to become the tree the carpenter marks. The question is whether the carpenter's criteria have anything to do with what you are actually for. Zhuangzi calls this kai yu bu kai, being material and not material to things, useful and not useful simultaneously, depending on who is asking and what they need. A vessel that is cracked is worthless to someone carrying water. It is priceless to someone growing a plant that needs drainage. The vessel did not change. Juan, the metric shifted. That is not a consolation prize reframe. That is an ontological fact about how value actually works. It is always relational. It is always perspectival. It is never absolute, even when the systems around you perform absolute certainty with complete conviction. Here is where this gets neurologically concrete. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, identity formation, and decision-making, is highly sensitive to what researchers call reference point anchoring. Once you accept a comparison frame, your brain treats it as a baseline reality, not a perspective, a fact. Dislodging it requires not better performance within the frame, but the conscious act of stepping outside it entirely and asking, whose frame is this, and did I ever actually choose it? The microscopic start today. Find one metric you check habitually. Follower count, step count, word count, whatever your version is, and ask yourself one honest question before you open it. Ask, if this number went to 0 tomorrow and no one could ever see it, would I still do the thing? You do not have to answer it correctly. You just have to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. The carpenter walked past the ancient oak. The oak is still there. Comment below. What is one metric you check regularly that, if you are completely honest, measures someone else's definition of success more than your own? So you've identified the scale. You've seen it for what it is, someone else's instrument, measuring someone else's definition of the tree. Good. Now comes the harder question. What do you fill that space with when you stop letting external metrics do the work of telling you who you are? Because here is what nobody tells you about stepping off the comparison treadmill. The silence that follows is not peaceful, not at first. It is genuinely uncomfortable, the way a limb feels when circulation returns after it's been cut off. You've been running that metric-checking loop so long that your sense of self has been partially outsourced to it. Strip it away. And there is a moment, sometimes a long moment, where you don't quite know what you're for. Zhuangzi has a name for what you cultivate in that gap. He calls it Shen, the spirit, not in a religious sense. Quan Di, not mysticism. The Shen, in Zhuangzi's framework, is the quality of inner aliveness that exists independently of whether anyone is watching, measuring, or approving. It is the thing that is still running when all the external feedback goes quiet. It is, by definition, the part of you that comparison cannot touch, because it was never in the competition to begin with. He writes about a cook named Ding who has butchered so many oxen that he no longer sees the animal in front of him. He sees only the spaces, the natural joints, the places where the blade meets no resistance. He moves through the work with what Zhuangzi describes as pure spirit. No effort, no performance, no audience required. The Shen is not built by grinding harder. It is uncovered by withdrawing from the grinding long enough, consistently enough, to remember what was underneath it. This is not a metaphor for laziness. This is a neuroscientific argument about how the brain actually restores itself. Research out of Stanford and the University of California has consistently demonstrated that the brain's default mode network, the system that activates during rest, mind wandering, and purposeless reflection, is not idle during downtime. It is doing critical integration work. It is consolidating identity. It is processing experience. It is running the maintenance operations that deliberate, goal-focused cognition physically cannot perform. When you never give it space, when every gap is filled with content, metrics, notifications, comparison loops, that integration never happens. Your sense of self stays fragmented, reactive, hostage to the last thing you looked at. What Zhuangzi calls nourishing the Shen, neuroscience calls default mode network restoration. Different vocabulary, identical prescription, and the research on what chronic social comparison actually does to the body makes this urgency concrete. It is not primarily a thinking problem. It is a somatic one. Cortisol elevation, disrupted sleep architecture, low-grade chest tightness that you've probably normalized to the point where you no longer notice it's there. The damage lives in the nervous system before it ever surfaces as a conscious thought. You can't argue your way out of it. You can't optimize your way out of it. You have to withdraw from the framework long enough for your system to stop treating comparison as a survival signal. Here is the practical translation. Purpose this time is not wasted time. It is the only environment in which the Shen can actually breathe. Not productive leisure, not podcasts that teach you things, not runs tracked by an app, not reading that builds your knowledge base. Genuinely purposeless time. Time that produces nothing, proves nothing, and generates no data point anyone could ever evaluate. The microscopic start. Block 20 minutes this week, not to meditate, not to journal, not to optimize anything. Sit somewhere you find tolerable, do nothing directed, and resist every impulse to make it useful. That resistance, that discomfort, that is the sound of your sheen waking up from a very long, very loud sleep. The cook Ding moved through the ox with pure spirit. The blade found its own path. Comment below. When was the last time you spent 20 minutes doing something that produced nothing, proved nothing, and that no one would ever see? And how did it feel? Here is where most people misread Zhuangzi completely. And it is an expensive misreading. They hear detachment, and they build a wall. They delete the apps. They stop checking the news. They retreat. They frame it as discipline, maybe even as wisdom. But what they have actually done is exchanged one form of control for another. They are still being driven by the comparison machine, just in the opposite direction now. Avoidance is not freedom. It is still a reaction. The machine is still steering. Zhuangzi never said, leave the marketplace. He walked straight through it. The concept is ya, usually translated as wandering, but that translation undersells it. Be you is not aimless drifting. It is free movement through the world, engaged, alert, fully present, without being captured by the world's agenda for you. It is the specific skill of participating in social structures without internalizing their value systems as your own. You can hold a job without letting your job title decide your worth. You can use a platform without accepting the platform's implicit promise that your follower count is a referendum on your existence. You can watch someone else's success without running it through a filter that says, "And what does that make me?" That last one is the hard part, because the comparison translation happens fast, neurologically fast. Research from the University of Michigan and the Max Planck Institute has shown that social comparison activates the brain's reward and threat circuitry within milliseconds of exposure before conscious reasoning has even entered the picture. You are not choosing to compare. Your brain is doing it automatically. using the social rank detection systems that evolved to keep you alive in small tribal groups. The problem is, those systems were never designed for a feed that serves you 300 status updates before breakfast. So the question is not, how do I stop seeing what other people are doing? You cannot unsee it. The question is, what happens in the half-second after you see it? That is where your lives. That is the practice. You encounter the content. You acknowledge it fully without denial. And then, before your nervous system drafts the whole story about what it means for you, you ask one clean question: do I accept the authority of this metric? Not, is this person successful? Not, should I be doing that? Just, does this particular measuring stick have jurisdiction over my life? Did I ever actually agree to that? Most of the time, the honest answer is no, you never agreed. It was ambient. It was assumed. The comparison framework installed itself while you were busy just trying to navigate the day. That recognition alone, not a dramatic rejection, just a quiet, clear, no, that's not mine, is the beginning of psychological untethering. Researchers studying what they call social comparison orientation have found that people who habitually pause to evaluate the relevance of a comparison rather than automatically absorbing it report significantly lower anxiety and higher baseline satisfaction over time. They are not less informed. They are not less engaged. They are just no longer reflexively handing authority over their self-concept to whatever they happen to scroll past. This is when you, in modern language, you move through the marketplace. You see the goods. You notice the prices. You do not have to buy. The microscopic start. The next time you open a social platform and you feel that familiar tightening, that low-grade sting of comparison activating, pause for 3 seconds before you keep scrolling. Just 3 seconds. Ask the question, do I accept the authority of this metric? You don't have to answer it deeply. You don't have to journal about it. The pause itself interrupts the automatic loop. Over time, that interruption becomes a habit. The habit becomes a posture. The posture becomes, yo. The figure in the marketplace keeps walking. The merchants keep calling. And the figure, unhurried, leaves no trace. Comment below. Think of a metric you've been absorbing from social media or your professional environment. Followers, salary, title, productivity, and ask yourself honestly, when did you actually choose to accept that as a measure of your worth? Here is something your productivity culture will never tell you. The most subversive thing you can do right now is nothing. Not optimized. Nothing. Not mindful recovery, scheduled between your 6 a.m. cold plunge and your evening journaling protocol. Actual nothing. Purposeless, undocumented, unshared, unoptimized nothing. The kind that produces no content, no insight to screenshot, no growth metric to report. The kind that, if someone asked you what you did this afternoon, you would genuinely struggle to answer. Zhuangzi called this Zhuangzi, eating and forgetting. It sounds passive. It is not. It is one of the most radical acts available to a person living inside the modern attention economy. Here is why it is radical. Modern culture has quietly installed a law you never voted for. All time must justify itself. Rest must enhance future productivity. A walk must have step count data. A conversation must be networking. A creative hobby must eventually become a side income. Even grief has been turned into content. The underlying message, delivered constantly and never stated directly, is that your existence requires proof, that you are only real, only worth something when you are producing something measurable. Zhuangzi is the direct refusal of that law. It is not self-care in the modern sense, because modern self-care has been colonized by the same optimization logic it was supposed to escape. Zhuangzi is not interested in helping you recover faster so you can perform better next week. He is interested in something more fundamental, returning you to a version of yourself that predates the performance entirely, the self that existed before the metrics, before the audience, Before the question, "But what is this for?" had any meaning at all, the neuroscience here is striking and worth knowing. Research from Stanford and the University of California has shown that when people engage in genuinely unstructured, undirected experience, walking without a destination, sitting without a task, letting the mind move without capturing its outputs, activity in the brain's default mode network, the DMN, shifts in measurable ways. The DMN, which is heavily recruited in self-referential thinking, social comparison, and future worry, shows reduced hyperconnectivity. What that means in plain language, the comparison machine quiets down, not because you forced it quiet, because you stopped feeding it material to work with. You removed the inputs. The noise settles on its own. This is not a metaphor. This is a mechanism. But here is what makes Zhuangzi Wen genuinely difficult in 2024. It feels like loss. It feels like falling behind. You sit in a park without your phone, and within 4 minutes, your brain is generating reasons why this is irresponsible. You take a drive without a podcast, and the silence feels like wasted cognitive real estate. That discomfort is not weakness. That discomfort is the sound of a reward system that has been conditioned to associate constant input with safety. The comparison machine doesn't just run on social media. It runs on the terror of having nothing to show. So the practice is uncomfortable, and it is supposed to be. The microscopic start once today. Do one thing with zero documentation and zero audience. Walk around the block and leave your phone on the table. Sit in your car for 5 minutes after you park and do not reach for anything. Cook a meal and do not film it. Draw something and delete it immediately. The activity does not matter. The constraint is what matters. No record, no witness, no proof. Just the act, complete in itself and then gone. That is Zhu Wang. That is sitting and forgetting. That is you, briefly but genuinely, outside the jurisdiction of the machine. The figure in the empty painting does not move. The seasons turn around them anyway. The water keeps flowing, and nothing about their stillness requires an audience to be real. Comment below. What is one thing you genuinely enjoy that you have never posted about, never optimized, and never turned into a goal? And when did you last actually do it? The comparison trap was never a character flaw. It was architecture, a system engineered to make your inadequacy feel personal, your stillness feel criminal, and your worth feel perpetually provisional. Zhuangzi watched the same machinery operate 2,000 years ago, just without the notification badges. His answer was not a productivity hack, not a new system to replace the old system, not a better way to compete. His answer was a complete reorientation of the question. Stop asking whether you are useful enough. Stop auditing your existence against benchmarks that were written by people who profit from the audit. The gnarled tree lives for centuries precisely because nothing ever tried to cut it down for lumber. The disabled man draws followers precisely because he moves through the world without performing for it. The most subversive act available to you, today, right now, inside the most optimized attention economy in human history, is to stop accepting usefulness as the measure of a life, not to abandon effort or ambition or craft, but to root those things in the inner aliveness that Zhuangzi called De, the spirit that cannot be compared because it cannot be measured, the thing you carry that was never on any leaderboard, the version of you that exists completely and fully even when no one is watching and nothing is being produced. That version of you is not a retirement plan. It is not a reward for hitting your goals. It is the ground you stand on right now, whether you have acknowledged it or not. Zhuangzi is simply asking you to look down and notice it is there. The freedom you are looking for is not on the other side of a better morning routine or a higher follower count. It is available in the next 5 minutes, in an unrecorded moment, in a walk you take without your phone, in a meal you cook and eat without documentation, in a single afternoon that produces nothing measurable and therefore nothing comparable. These pockets of genuine uselessness are not wasted time. They are the recovery of something the comparison economy has been quietly extracting from you since the day you got your first device. The unshakable knowledge that you are worth something simply because you exist. Verity that. You from it. Build from it. Comment below. What is one thing the comparison machine has made you feel behind on, that, if you're honest, you don't actually want and never truly did? The koi does not wait for permission to swim. It does not pause at the surface to check its metrics. It moves through the dark water and into the open, not because the path is clear, but because moving is what it is. That is the practice. That is the philosophy. That is what we are building here. Subscribe to Mind Koi and keep moving.